Morning, Matt. I was watching your video this morning about Stan Groff and holotropic breathing and LSD, and there was a couple of things which really jumped out at me on that. I mean, firstly, just to get rid of this first, the stuff at the end about astrology and the relationship between natal transits and the potency of an LSD experience. I didn't get that at all, really. I've never come across that. If there's any research to support that, I'd love to see it. It sounds completely bogus to me. But some of the bits I thought were really interesting, particularly in relation to LSD and in relation to reality, which I want to think into a little bit. I mean, I haven't touched drugs for years, actually. 30 years probably, almost 30 years. But I did LSD quite a bit, in my youth, and other bits and pieces. And they were undoubtedly life-changing in good and bad ways. Oh, not really life-changing, but they were, they helped me to think of things I think would have been quite difficult to think about without those experiences, but good and bad. So yeah, I just want to come to that. I've never done the holotropic breathing thing. But there's two things about reality, I think, in relation to that, which I took out of the LSD experience, and they relate to what you're talking about there, actually. I mean, the first thing is to do with how real is reality. When you were talking about LSD, Matt, you were talking about it giving access to a kind of numinous, more fundamental, more kind of more real reality, really. I don't think you used that phrase, but it was this idea that on a deeper level, I think you might have used that phrase, that you can access a deeper level of reality, a more fundamental level of reality, by something like an hallucinogenic. And there's two things about that. The first thing is what I got from the LSD experiences, and what you seem to be supporting by what you're saying there, although you're saying it in a different way, is that reality, as we understand it, is largely something that people feel. Reality is a feeling. I think I kind of believe that, really. And by that I don't mean to undermine, the reality of shared facts and empirical science and positivistic understandings and interpersonal agreement and any of those kind of verification methods that we've got. I mean, I've got a great deal of respect for those, of course, or possibly even other ways of accessing information that I don't know about. But I'm not disputing that. But I think when we use the word reality, particularly when we use it in a kind of vernacular way in conversation, without precise definitions, we're not really talking about the empirical world or the material world or some other specific aspect of it, of the universe. We're talking about how we feel. And I got that from LSD, and then what you seem to be pointing to there with your comments towards the deeper realities or something like that, is that certain things, and hallucinogenics being one of them, can alter the feeling of whether something is real or not. Andrew Newberg talks about this in one of his books, Why God Won't Go Away. He talks about it as the functioning of what he calls the existential operator, which is it's brain function. He describes, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a brain function which awards the status of reality to entities that we see. So you look at some things in the world and you say that's real. You look at some other things in your world and you say, oh, that's just an illusion, it's a trick of the light. And we understand the difference. And our ability to understand that difference, according to Newberg, is the functioning of the existential operator. Sorry, that wandered off track a bit. But either way, the point being that this ability to determine whether something is real or not is a feeling. You feel, oh yeah, that's real. You make me feel mighty real. But it's not just an on-off switch. That's the other thing about this reality thing. It's not just whether something is real or not. That's not how we experience it, I don't think. We experience it on a sliding scale. And you can experience things as more real. I know that's not how science describes it, but I think it is part of human functioning. We can experience things with greater and greater sense of reality. We kind of tag certain experiences and as existentially more real. And LSD and some other experiences, maybe holotropic breathing, for me at least, allowed me to experience that firsthand. Because certainly some of the LSD experiences, even though in the kind of informal literature around it, LSD experiences tend to be associated with unreality, with hallucinations, with mirages and phantasms. Certainly my experience a lot of the time wasn't like that at all. It was about a sense of how real this thing is, more real than real. Yeah, so you're not seeing the world different. You're not seeing snakes climbing up the walls or any of those things quite often. You're seeing the world exactly as it is, but imbued with a much, much stronger sense of reality. The grass is really, really green. It doesn't change colour. It isn't luminescent. It hasn't gone strange glittery bits or anything like that. It's exactly the same as it was, but it's just much more real, you know. It's like someone's turned the dial on your existential operator up to 11, so everything is much more real than it was. So reality is a continuum. It's just like, in experiential terms, it's a sliding scale. And this one we're used to, you know, which I'm not disputing or wanting to undermine the material universe that we operate within in all its complexity and beauty and interest. But when we talk about reality, I think we're talking about a certain level of our feeling towards it, perhaps a default setting. And something like the LSD experience, but also some mystical experiences, possibly religious experience, maybe holotropic breathing, can just tweak that dial a bit and give you a little bit of, if not control over it, an experience of different levels and different settings on that. I think one of the things that, for me, one of the implications of that has been, is an observation of how that functions in people who are religious, and how pointless it often is, making appeals to reality to people who are infected, let's say, by certain kinds of religious delusions. Quite a lot of the time I see, particularly on YouTube but elsewhere, people who are of an atheist persuasion, like myself, criticising people who are religious and saying, why don't these people wake up to reality? Which I think is quite off, which I can understand the reasons why they might say that. But what that doesn't take into account, of course, is that from the perspective of the person who's having the experience, they are experiencing reality, and they're probably experiencing it more than you are, because their dial is turned up to 11. Now, of course, we can say, us who have got the default setting, we can say, it's misfiring. Their dial is set too high. They're getting too much reality. They're getting too much of a feeling of reality. That's what the problem is. But what that doesn't take into account, that we also have a dial. Our dial is set to 5. That's the default setting. It's been like that for our whole lives. We don't notice it. And you know what I mean. We have to also recognise the felt sense of our own relationship to reality, the felt nature of our own reality, before we can really start saying ours is real and theirs isn't. We've just got dials in a different setting, I think. Anywho, the other thing about this is to do with, and it's related really, but it's to do with the kind of fundamental status of that reality thing you're talking about. And again, this is a little bit of a personal testimony from what I gained or learned or experienced from that, from my own dabblings. Which is, again, this thing about, are you accessing something fundamental, some numinous reality which underpins all of our realities, or something like that. I mean, for a while I certainly thought that. Because I had those feelings I've just described, a feeling of, oh wow, this is really real, it must be, because it feels so real to me, because it feels more real to me than anything else I've experienced, it must really be more real than anything else. But I came off that relatively quickly, actually. And what I started to realise was that these are kind of subjective realities we're walking through. Again, we have these experiences which are common, and we can access a lot of that common experience, but a lot of it is completely subjective. The atomic weight of mercury stays the same, an oak tree is still an oak tree, all those things. But the way we craft that into an experience, the way we sculpt our individual experience in the world, can vary enormously. I'm reminded here, this is a bit of a deviation again, is of one of Philip K. Dick's stories, The Eye in the Sky, which is a really great story, typical Philip K. Dick kind of story, which is about these people who visit, I think it's like a collider or something like that, some physics plant, which is just a conceit that something goes wrong, and they're immediately kind of thrown into an alternative world. I think it's like a police state, this one, in which it's all very dictatorial. and then at a certain point the reality shifts again, and they're into a kind of theocracy, which is all terribly mystical. And it switches again, and they're into this terrifying, paranoid, insectoid kind of world, in which the reality is kind of permeated with what feels like an insect intelligence. And it moves through a series of these, but what you find out is happening is that some machinic thing is going on, which is projecting each of the individuals in the groups, their individual experience, onto the world at large. So their solipsistic, subjective experience of the world is being shared. So everyone's feeling the world in the way that everyone's experiencing the reality that one another experiences. The facts of the world stay the same. The atomic weight of mercury and oak trees are the same in all of their worlds, but their engagement and relationship to those things just vary enormously, And I had a similar kind of thing eventually from my dabblings years ago, which is one of the things that stayed with me, which is that, yes, you go to this place and it might be numinous, or you go to this other place, if you take the wrong bit of blotting paper on the wrong day, you do go to the world of insectoid intelligences, and these things vary. Reality is the feeling of that reality can change very dramatically. So it's not just that it increases in scale and things can feel more or less real, but also that feeling of reality can have different kind of colours and tones and accents. With everything else, as I say, staying the same, all the facts of physics and biology and everything still staying the same, but the relationship to it differing enormously. But it's not that. But for me, the thing about that is that when you come back, it's like one of these labyrinth things. You go to the centre of the labyrinth and you come back transformed. Is that when you come back, things are never quite the same, because you've always, in a sense, got this slight ironic distance on your own experience. You've seen other realities, which sounds terribly mystical, but again, I'm just talking about subjective engagement. You've seen the insectoid planet. You've seen this world as a beautiful place, and then you come back, and here you are with your default setting set to 5, and everything's back to normal again. But it's the normal that's just normal because you were raised in it. You know what I mean? And it's the one that's just about, this is Fred World, welcome to Fred World. That's what it's like, and the fact that I've been walking through Fred World for the last 30 years without any kind of chemical inducements to experience anything else doesn't mean to say this is real. Doesn't mean to say that this feels absolutely default setting real for me, but I kind of know that I could change the settings on that really easily. I could very easily, with a very small amount of chemicals, turn the volume up to 11, or without changing anything materially, populate this planet with an insectoid intelligence, or give it the voice of God. And this is as ultimately as solipsistic. Not the world, but my position and relationship to it is as solipsistic as any of those others. Anyway, give me lots to think about there, Matt. Thanks very much for that. Quick follow-up to a video I made to Matt in relation to subjective realities, LSD, holotropic breathing, Stan Groff, and so on. What I was saying in that is that, partly influenced by LSD experiences and so on, I've kind of come to the conclusion, or the realisation, that large parts of reality are felt, and doesn't alter the empirical reality of certain facts and statistics and data and all those kind of things. But the thing that we call reality, at least in vernacular terms, is an expression of our feeling in relation to those things, and that can vary. What I came up at the end of that saying is that it can vary enormously, not just in terms of whether you've turned your existential operator up to 11 or not, so things feel more real than real or less real than real, but also it can vary in terms of its tone. So one person's hell can be another person's heaven. It sounded like I was saying. But I want to just qualify that quite a bit, really. Because what I don't want us to say, because I don't believe, is that all experience is subjective. You can plonk someone down with a particular reality tunnel in mind in the middle of Auschwitz and they'll have a great time. Or you can plonk somebody else with a very different reality tunnel in the middle of Disneyland and they'll have a terrible time. That's not what I'm saying, you know. And I want to just qualify that in relation to Timothy Leary, since we're talking about LSD, because he had this thing about, the 3 factors which feature in whether an LSD experience is positive, negative, strong or weak, and so on. And the 3 factors are dosage, of course. The more you take, the more effect it tends to have. But also, and crucially, really, and Matt, you mentioned this kind of in your video, crucially, set and setting. Set is the state your body's in. Setting is the environment your body is in. So if your body is in a state of pain, or in a state of duress or hunger, or something like that, then the chances are you're not going to have a good LSD trip. Similarly, if your setting is one in which you are in a police cell, perhaps being threatened, or just in a threatening environment full stop, or if you're, any kind of condition of unsafety, something like that, then again, you're not going to have a good experience on LSD. You're just not. That's why people who used to do the LSD thing would tend to make sure that their bodies were in good shape, not good shape, but we're not racked with pain, because LSD can just accentuate that, and we're not in situations of danger, so you'd have people around you who could help you and comfort you and make sure everything was fine. And the same thing doesn't just apply to LSD reality, the same thing applies to other kinds, to the reality we all experience, doesn't it? You know what I mean? Yeah, your default setting, my default setting for, obviously I've got, in terms of the existential operator, I experience the world at about 5, same as everybody else. Everything's kind of real. Sometimes it feels a bit more real, sometimes it feels a bit less, but generally it's pretty real. And the reality tunnel, if I can borrow Anton Wilson's term, the reality tunnel I'm locked in is generally for me a fairly optimistic one. I'm generally optimistic. I don't know why, but I am generally optimistic. Tend to be fairly happy. Tend not to be able to focus on unhappy things for very long. But believe me, you put my body under stress, give me some pain, and my reality tunnel will absolutely change, and it does, Or put me in a setting in which I'm fearful, or in which things are threatening, or in which things are unpleasant in a million different ways, an environment which is bad. Yeah, my reality tunnel will shift. It's not just that I have this solid grasp of my subjective solipsistic reality that I can just export to a million different environments and fuck whether I'm in pain or not, and fuck whether the world around me is in pain or not. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. Setting and dosage, it doesn't just apply to LSD, it applies to life itself, And I think that's one of the I don't know. Yeah, well, it's just one of the problems with an over-solipsistic or an over-reliance on this idea of subjectivity, because we tend to associate subjectivity with solipsism, and solipsism with purely with psychology, or maybe even psychiatry, and subjectivity with purely psychology, and that's a shame in many ways. You know what I mean? Because yes, of course, if you're a positive person like I tend to be, then it's slightly easier to go through environments like this. But I would not want to be in Abu Ghraib, I would not want to be in Guantanamo Bay. I would not want to be in Auschwitz. There's a million places on the planet I would not want to be right now. And you can't justify not looking at the environment by saying, well, we've just got to sort out individual psychology. I do think there's a huge gap there, I have to say. I do think there's a huge gap in terms of our understanding and how we deal with things. Because I think we're really good at getting the interpersonal stuff and the intersubjective stuff sorted. I mean, that's the scientific empirical project, isn't it? Getting the stuff that's just common to all of us. The atomic weight of mercury, what an oak tree is. We're really good at that. We've nailed it, I think. What we're not very good at is valuing individual difference, subjectivity, and finding good ways of talking about how these things relate to one another. A consilience project, Edward O. Wilson, yeah. A kind of consilience project, which isn't just about reconciling the sciences to one another, or reconciling different branches of knowledge to one another. It's also about compiling individual differences and making them make sense, so that, without it just being, without it just collapsing into a who's best competition. My reality is better than yours, and I win in the reality stakes. You know, the world is a paranoid nightmare, therefore everybody has to join me in it. The world is a beautiful place, therefore everybody has to join me in that. You know, I don't think it's about establishing one reality that we have to all sign up for. It's a different kind of meta-language which, resuming, it's a different kind of meta-language which talks to individual difference and allows you to it's kind of pataphysics, a kind of Jarrian pataphysics, a science of exceptions, a science of imaginary solutions. It's a way of talking about individual subjective difference, not as simply residing within the individual psychology and therefore being of no greater significance to the world than that individual person, but of how these things relate to one another, about how your reality relates to mine, relates to one another's. You know, without, as I said, just collapsing into a who's best competition. And also, and I think crucially, how they touch down in empiricism and touch down in positivism, you know, and link to the data of the world. You know what I mean? You can't just have this stuff floating free. You've got to anchor it in intersubjective experience as well. So something that manages to reconcile all those kind of things. We need a good language for that. I mean, and personally, if I was going to invent it now, I would call it religion. So I know it's a term that's got so much baggage attached with, absolutely bloody hopeless right now. I was watching one of those Sam Harris videos on Big Think, these little short videos, and he was talking about science being, I beg your pardon, he was talking about religion being failed science. And I think he's wrong, actually, to be honest with you. I think it's just an attempt at a project that didn't have the building blocks in place ready for it then. You know, religion should be invented now. But this is a good time to invent something like that. You know, inventing religion, an attempt to tie everything together when you don't know what you're tying together, which I think was essentially the case, or has been the case for most of human history. That's a shame, and particularly when you haven't got empiricism. You know, you need something like empiricism, something about the science of shared experience, the science of facts, the science of theory. You need that. You know, you need that intersubjective, totally intersubjective and objective, if you like, reality, universals. You need the establishment of those in which empiricism does best. But you also got to recognise individual difference. The fact that we are coming into this world, yes, with instruments that measure the world in some ways in the same thing, but do completely different things with that sometimes. And yeah, that would be a good project. Now I would call it religion. I would try and tie it in now, not as failed science, but as another thing, a next step. It would be open source, and there wouldn't be any priests, and there'd be no occult power structures hiding information from you. Yeah, that'd be nice. Look how beautiful the day it is, look. I'll just pan around this. See, I'm saying it's a beautiful day because I've got my positive reality tunnel head on today. You know, sometimes I look around at this and I think, I wonder how many things are dying in those bushes. And sometimes I look down and there are dead things floating in the canal, but there aren't any today. Actually, when I walked past here yesterday, there's a rabbit floating in the canal, which must have been there for about a week, I guess. It was really blown up like a balloon from its internal bacteria creating the gases and inflating it. I did think about poking it with a stick to see if it exploded, but I didn't.